Hello, Marina. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for joining us. We have a lot to talk about today. Of course, we will be talking about sustainability from the airport perspective today. But before we dive into this topic, why don't you share with us your aviation journey? What's your background? How did you get to your current position at the head of sustainability at ACI Europe?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you also for the invitation to this podcast. Actually, my career did not really start in aviation. I think it was more a coincidence, actually a lucky coincidence that I got to aviation. My background in terms of studies is political science. And after my studies, I actually joined a consultancy to work on various topics. And that's actually where at some point I was lucky enough to be assigned to aviation-related projects. So this is how I discovered basically aviation. And I really fell in love with the sector. And this is why then a couple of years ago, I decided to really specialize in that field. And then once again was lucky enough to find the position with ACI Europe. I have been with ACI Europe now for over 6 years.
Very nice. It's not difficult to fall in love with aviation, is it?
For me, it's obvious. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's even a very special day. We are recording on the 7th December, which is International Civil Aviation Day. So happy International Civil Aviation Day to all of our listeners and to you as well. So now let's talk about airport carbon accreditation, which is the initiative developed by ACI. And please share with us who stands behind this initiative, why was it established, and where we are at the moment.
Airport carbon accreditation is an initiative that we launched as ACI Europe back in 2009 with the main objective to help our members reduce their carbon emissions. And we really thought that it was important for us as the Association of European Airports to proactively take steps to establish such an initiative. It is a program that actually was also developed jointly with our members. So it is really a program developed for airports by airports. And I think this is also what really is a part of its value, because it's really industry specific. So when we started with this program in 2009, we had initially 17 airports that joined the initiative. And over the years, actually, the program has really seen significant success in the sense that it also expanded beyond Europe. So today it is a global program, and it actually has 373 accredited airports as of today from 76 countries and representing roughly 46% of global air passenger traffic. So the growth has really been tremendous. And I think most importantly, we do also report on the carbon performance results achieved by these airports. And we just released our latest figures a couple of weeks ago. And there we actually were very happy to announce emissions reductions at the global level by all the accredited airports of over 340,000 tons of CO2. And that actually is a reduction of roughly 5.5% compared to the baseline, so the historic emissions baseline. So that's actually really, I think, the achievement we are most proud of, because it really shows that airports are actively reducing their emissions. They are achieving results.
Absolutely, and it's definitely also one of the answers for the criticism that aviation has to face, especially recently, that, as you are saying, since 2009, where it wasn't as hot topic as it is today, and since that year already on the airport side, a lot has been done since then. And I didn't really know that the idea was born within ACI Europe, and then it spread to the all parts of the world, which is fantastic. So let's dive a bit deeper into this. So if there are airport managers who are listening to us today, can you describe them? Why should they consider joining this program if their airports are not within the program yet? What would be your message for them?
So, my message would be definitely yes, you should join the program, and that really for several reasons. I think the first and most obvious reason is that today, actually for any company, and I would say especially also in aviation, where, as you pointed out, we do have a lot of challenges in terms of addressing our climate impacts. We actually do not even have a choice of addressing emissions or not. It's basically an obligation. And it's an obligation that arises, on one hand, of course, from, I would say, a moral responsibility, right? It's one of the main challenges we are facing as humankind anyway. But it is also an obligation that arises from the policy context we are in, especially I would say in Europe. Objectives in terms of climate goals are very ambitious. We need to live up to those ambitions also as the airport industry. We also have societal pressure. And I think it's also interesting to note that the investor community is also increasingly interested in the sustainability performance of companies. So in a way, the success of a company in managing its emissions will also determine its ability to access finance. So also from a business perspective, it definitely makes sense to address your emissions. Through airport carbon accreditation, we do offer guidance and a framework on how to do that. And as I mentioned before, it is really an airport-specific program. So when setting it up, of course, it doesn't mean that we reinvented the wheel. So there were already a lot of carbon management standards out there, which we did use as the foundation. And then basically we, in a way, transposed them into the operational context of airports. So in particular, we use the greenhouse gas protocol and also ISO 14064 as the foundation for the program. And then basically we outlined what those standards meant for airports. This resulted also in a program structure which is based on increasingly stringent accreditation levels. Initially, we started with 4 levels, and then we moved on actually last year to 6 levels. And as airports actually progress through these levels, of course, the obligations become more and more demanding. And that actually refers to several dimensions. So on one hand, the scope of emissions that you need to address, the stringency of reduction obligations, and also very important, the need to engage with third parties, so with your stakeholders, to also encourage broader emissions reductions. Because if you look at the airport, there are a lot of different parties interacting and producing emissions, not just the airport operator. And actually the airport operator emissions, if you compare them to the total aviation emissions globally, they represent roughly 2%. So the major impact is coming, of course, from aircraft operations, but also other types of businesses contribute to the total footprint at the airport. And the ambition is really to try to address those as well as much as possible. So I would really say that, again, through airport carbon accreditation, we provide a framework. We help airports really also on a technical level reduce their emissions. And also what is important is that we provide through this program a sort of label. So it is also about the public recognition of airports' efforts. We have several authoritative institutions in the area of aviation and climate change that are actually supporting this program. The European Commission, the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat, the European Civil Aviation Conference, and there are also others. So this just to say that it is really an authoritative label and an airport-specific one that you can receive to really also get an acknowledgement, a recognition of your efforts.
100%, yeah. A couple of points on that. As Willie Walsh keeps saying, this is the challenge of our time, the climate change and how we can tackle it as aviation. And as you rightly pointed out, nobody can do anything on its own. So we need to work together, as you are saying. Even though airports are not the largest polluters in terms of the aviation industry, we definitely need to play our part. And thanks to you and to your initiative since 2009, this is being done. And in from a certain perspective, it is a bit easier for the airports to reduce their carbon footprint compared to the airlines, but it's very important to do that for sure as well. So you mentioned that how you are supporting directly the airport. So let's go a bit further on the next step. So how the process looks like. So let's say I am a regional airport and I will apply that I want to become a member of Airport Carbon Accreditation. What follows then?
So first of all, I think it's important to point out that as an airport, you can join at any level. So there is no obligation to join at level 1 and then go to level 2 and subsequently through all these levels. So you can also...
Speaking of that, can you maybe explain, sorry for jumping in, can you maybe explain what's the difference between the levels? So what does it mean, level 1 and level 6 and in between?
Sure. So at level 1, which we call mapping, an airport is required to establish a carbon footprint of what we call the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So these are categories as defined by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol I mentioned before, and that basically refers to those emissions that the airport operator directly controls. So here we are speaking of emissions arising, for instance, from the use of fuel in ground vehicles, from heating, from cooling. The use of electricity, of course, is actually, in many cases, the main emission source if we look at the airport operator emissions only. And at level 1, you also need to have a high-level commitment from your senior management, ideally, of course, the CEO, basically outlining that your airport is committed to reduce emissions and really be ambitious in that field. Then, as we move on to level 2, which is called reduction, airports also have to establish a carbon management plan. So that includes a plan of actions, measures that the airport is going to implement and actually is already implementing to reduce emissions. It's, of course, also about establishing a relevant governance structure for monitoring, reporting purposes at the airport, and so on. And then, most importantly, also actually it's at level 2 that the airport also has to already demonstrate that it has achieved emissions reductions. Then, as we move on to level 3, here the main change is that we broaden the scope of emissions. So in addition to Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, there is also a selected set of Scope 3 emissions that airports need to include into their carbon footprint. And Scope 3 emissions, these are emissions from third parties. At this level as well, the airport has to establish a stakeholder engagement plan, basically also outlining actions that are taken to collaborate with the various parties at the airport to reduce these Scope 3 emissions.
I'm curious. So the third parties, does this include also the airlines, their emissions when they are at the airport? So basically after landing, so from taxiing, is that included in this Scope 3?
Yes, it is included. Mm-hmm. So actually at level 3, to be more precise, also at level 3 and 3+, we are looking at the emissions from the landing and takeoff cycle. And yes, that also does include everything that is happening on the ground. So there is no obligation, to be clear, for the airport to show that there is a reduction on these emissions. because, these emissions are not controlled by the airports. That's why they are scope 3. So you cannot put an obligation basically directly on airports to reduce those emissions. But it's really about cooperation and helping also the airlines reducing their carbon footprint. Then as we move to level 3+, here the requirement that comes on top of the rest is actually offsetting residual scope 1 and scope 2 emissions of the airport, and also emissions that relate to business travel of the airport staff. So this is the level we call neutrality, because basically when you can show that you have reduced to a significant extent your emissions and offset, so basically compensated for the rest, you can claim neutrality. Then the two new levels that we introduced last year, they actually go beyond that in terms of ambition, in the sense that at level 4 that we call transformation and level 4+ that we call transition, airports have to establish long-term emission reduction targets which are aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So at the previous levels, airports have a lot of flexibility, also in terms of the ambition to set for their reduction. With level 4 and 4+, we really require this alignment with the Paris Agreement. And that needs to be given, so for the end goal, so basically a long-term goal, but also you need to define an emissions pathway leading to that goal. And of course, this pathway also has to be ambitious and consistent with your end goal. At these levels, we also, again, broaden the emissions scope, especially on scope 3. And the most significant change here is that for airline emissions, we are not only looking at the landing and takeoff cycle anymore, but really the full flight. Of course, that completely dwarfs, if I may say so, the emissions from the airport operator, if you put those into perspective. But it's just really very important in our view that airports have visibility and understanding of their full emissions footprint, let's say, including also the activities that the airport does facilitate. And the last point probably to point out, the 4+ difference between 4 and 4+, it's actually the same as the one between 3 and 3+. It's the offsetting of residual emissions. So this, in a nutshell, are the levels. Of course, there is a lot more to be said about that, also from the perspective of methodology to calculate your emissions, data requirements, and so on. All our technical documentation, manuals, guidance documents are available online, publicly on our website. So I would say that the first step for an airport that is interested to join would be to look through this documentation, get familiar with it, and then once the airport feels that, well, it is ready actually to go further, potentially start an application, there is a party actually that the airport can reach out to. Because actually, even though as ACI Europe, we are the initiator, also the owner of the airport carbon accreditation, it was very important to us that the, let's say, technical process of accreditation is done independently by a separate third party, who we call the program administrator. So it's not ACI accrediting our own members, that would not be credible. We have a separate party that is receiving all the data, processing it, and ultimately also deciding on accreditation. This role is currently being held by the company WSP, a UK-based consultancy. And part of their role is also to be actually a help desk provider. So if an airport has a query, a question on the accreditation requirements, or needs something for the preparation of its application, it can always reach out to that help desk provided by WSP. As you move a bit further in the process, there is actually also an online platform through which the airport can then formally prepare its application and submit it. One important point I also would like to make that's really key also for those airports that are interested in joining the program for the first time. In addition to the review and evaluation of your application that is being done by the administrator, so WSP, your application also needs to be verified by a separate independent third party, who we call the independent third party verifiers. So these are basically individuals who are specifically approved by airport carbon accreditation as individuals who are entitled to verify airport carbon accreditation applications. And they basically make a sort of audit of the application before it comes to the administrator. So we really have two layers here of evaluation by the verifier and then by the administrator. That was also very important to us to really make sure that the process is robust and credible.
Thank you very much for doing the explanation. I understood quite a lot, and I'm sure everybody who's for who this topic is relatively new, as it was for me. So thanks a lot for clarifying all the differences between different levels. And obviously, as you are saying, the process is really transparent with all the third parties being involved. So well done for that as well. I'm sure this also helps to give more credibility to the whole program. So I think that's very, very important. Now, probably a difficult question, or maybe not. Let's see. Many airport managers can have the perception that going down that route, that ideally making your airport carbon neutral or even better levels, requires a massive investment and it's a really expensive process. So, is that true, or is that a myth?
I would say it is true, but there is a but in it, and I will explain why. So first of all, yes, of course, you need to invest a lot, I would say, in order to significantly decarbonize. We have been making some calculations regarding decarbonization specifically of European airports. So more specifically, we were looking at how much investment it might take for the top 50 European airports to make their terminal buildings net zero in terms of CO2 emissions. So that's more ambitious than carbon neutrality. And there our conclusion was, and again here we are talking only about terminal buildings and only about the top 50 European airports, was that it might cost up to 26 billion euro. So the amount, I would say, it's quite significant. And of course, then on top of that, you would have investments in things like fleet renewal, putting in place electric charging stations, and so on. So yes, indeed, that's not cheap. At the same time, we need to bear in mind that one significant lever also to decarbonize for airports is by improving their energy efficiency. So that's, of course, also about reducing your energy consumption. And if we speak about reducing energy consumption, well, it also means reducing your energy bill. So there are also gains on that side. Another example, for instance, we know that electric equipment for ground services, for instance, yes, it is much more expensive when you purchase it than conventionally fueled equipment. But it usually, in the longer run, has less maintenance costs, for instance. So if you look at the whole lifetime of the equipment, at the end, actually, electric equipment is likely to be even less expensive than conventionally fueled one. So you also have to take a look at that from various perspectives. And finally, I would like to come back to the point I mentioned earlier in terms of the investor interest in sustainability. Clearly, we expect that in the coming years, companies that have a strong sustainability performance will have more ease, let's say, in accessing capital in terms of also the capital cost than companies that are not very ambitious in decarbonization specifically, but also sustainability more broadly.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the clarification. As you said, for those 50 airports, top 50 airports, it would be 26 billion. But in this case, we are talking about really large airports, which were handling before COVID maybe 15 plus million passengers per year. So if we are talking about the regional airports, which serves maybe less than 1 million passengers per year with a simple terminal building and much smaller infrastructure, I guess these investments are significantly lower as well. And also in terms of financing, are you able to offer some support to the airports in this area as well? And potentially maybe a second question related to the financing. We know about the massive Green Deal plan from the EU. Does that also include some sort of investment opportunities for the airports to become net zero?
So first of all, as ACI Europe, we are actually, unfortunately, not in a position to offer any funding support. Indeed, the financing has to come directly from the airports. When it comes to the Green Deal, one potential source of funding are the Horizon Europe project. So basically, it is a major EU funding program, mainly for R&D projects, of course, but there is a lot also that you can do in R&D, which relates to stakeholder engagement, for instance, and that then, of course, also helps an airport become accredited, especially at the higher levels of airport carbon accreditation. Another opportunity is also the so-called investment fund, EU Innovation Fund, which actually is related to the EU emissions trading system, and where airports, amongst other companies, also can submit project proposals specifically in the area of decarbonization and potentially get funding support. There was an opportunity in principle also recently related to the recovery funding provided by the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility, which has quite a strong focus generally on decarbonization, but unfortunately there we saw that it was virtually impossible for airports and even airport decarbonization projects to get funding. So that was rather disappointing. But we of course are also working as ACI Europe with the European institutions to highlight the need for more funding opportunities for airports, especially also in the current crisis context.
100%. So certainly there are ways for getting funds for these so important investments. I had a quick look on your website, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess there are already 46 airports in Europe that are carbon neutral. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
In Europe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is a fantastic number, and a number or a fact that is not being talked about enough. So maybe you can share some success stories from airports who went really from zero to being carbon neutral, and how that process looked like, because I think it's really fascinating to talk about these success stories.
Absolutely, and I think one challenge also that we do have in terms of communicating about carbon neutral airports is once again referring, to the emissions scope that is covered by this carbon neutral label, let's say. When we speak about carbon neutrality at level 3+, we do really refer to the emissions under the direct control of the airport operator, so that does not include the airline emissions. So basically, in a way, it's the carbon neutrality of the airport operator for a specific airport site. You see, so when you start kind of being really very precise, it can get a bit complicated, and this is why indeed it can be challenging in terms of communication. But of course, there are a lot of success stories behind and really great initiatives undertaken by the airports. One example I would like to mention are the Hermes airports in Cyprus, so Paphos and Larnaca, which together I think serve roughly 10 million passengers. So these are rather smaller airports. They joined airport carbon accreditation for the first time at level 1 in 2016, and then every year upgraded to a higher level and ultimately reached level 3+ in 2019. And now they're also working on an upgrade to level 4+. So indeed, they do have a very ambitious plan. By the way, also they are committed to reaching net zero CO2 at the latest by 2050. What they have done in order to reach these results, they actually did a lot of great work on energy efficiency. So they have revamped their heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. They have put in place a building management system, which actually also overall helps optimize the energy use within the building. For instance, reflecting the occupancy rates of different spaces in the building. So these are quite sophisticated systems. They, for instance, also put in place LED lights instead of conventional lights. So a lot has been done in this energy efficiency domain, with the result that between 2010 and 2018, the airports could reduce their electricity consumption by around 32%. And that's all the more remarkable as over the same period, traffic grew by over 40%. So there has been like a complete, not just decoupling actually between the energy consumption and growth in passenger traffic, but they just completely followed different directions. So one is increasing and the other one is decreasing. So I think this is really very impressive. Also, Hermes airports are currently working on the setup of 2 solar power plants, which are expected to cover roughly 28% of the airport's energy needs. So this just to give you an example. We do also publish in our annual reports, which are also all publicly available on our website, many other case studies. So I would say that if airports are interested to get to know a bit more in concrete terms of what airports all over the world have been doing to become accredited at the various levels of the program, these annual reports, I think, are really a very useful source of information.
Absolutely, and we make sure we add all the links to the sites you mentioned today on the show, in the show notes of the podcast, so our listeners can access them directly. Marina, thank you very much. It was a really fascinating discussion. Thank you for all your insights, for explaining us how the airport air carbon accreditation works and what are the benefits, what are the opportunities for the airport. As you said a couple of times, it is not just the right thing to do in terms of saving the planet and fighting the climate change. It also makes sense economically and financially also in many aspects for the airports to go down that path. So thanks a lot for all the work that you are doing at ACI Europe and especially at Airport Carbon Accreditation. And thank you for being with us today. And last question before we say goodbye, which I always ask at the very end, and which is even more relevant today on the International Civil Aviation Day, is what do you love the most about aviation?
That's really a great question. Well, what I like the most is probably that, in spite of the challenges that aviation is facing, right, in terms of sustainability, also the current COVID crisis context, I think that it is still a sector that makes many people dream, right? Even though there are, of course, phenomenal flight shaming and this type of things, but especially when you see kids, for instance, with the little airplane somewhere in the park, I think you really understand it makes people dream. And I think that there are actually not that many economic sectors that do really make people dream, right? So this is, I think, really one fascinating aspect.
Thank you very much, Marina. It was a pleasure talking to you. All the best.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Thanks a lot.